This video is sponsored by the Magnet Baron, your one-stop shop for all your 40k magnetization needs. More about them later on in the video. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and welcome to another Best Lists in 40k video. I did this last week, and y'all seemed to like it, so we're gonna try one more time talking about the undefeated lists for a weekend of competitive Warhammer 40k. Well, last week we talked about the USO Tacoma Open, one of the largest events run for 10th edition so far, and it's a little bit surprising victory by Adeptus Custodes. This week we don't have quite as many large events to talk about. Now, last week I had a couple typos in the list in the video that I had introduced when I transcribed the lists over to video form. So this time I'm just going to take some screenshots of the lists themselves so that I can't make any mistakes. So I apologize for that. Hopefully it's going to do better this time. And as always, I'm going to try to focus on the most interesting or unique lists out of each faction. But I also think it's important to talk about the proportion of undefeated lists made up by that faction. So let's dive in with the power level leader right now, Aeldari. These are, I think, the undisputed masters of Warhammer 40k for the last couple of weeks, and that doesn't look like they're being unseated anytime soon. While Genestealer cults might be of a similar power level, it is trending towards looking like Genestealer cults might be pretty tough to play and have some hard counters, because while they are able to maintain a very good win rate, they have a tough time getting to that undefeated level, whereas Aeldari are not having the same problem. The first list we'll talk about is from Tom Bunnell at the Cross Swords War at the Westford. This was a 24-player, 5-round GT on the much smaller side, but a pretty interesting build. This was Aeldari proper and took some staples that we've seen in many Eldar lists in the past, including a Farseer Skyrunner with the Phoenix Gem to grant guide to a unit to give them hit rerolls, as well as a Warlord Autarch Wayleaper to generate command points. In addition, we also had two Spirit Seers, one with Fate's Messenger to flip some dice into 6s, and the other one with Reader of the Runes. We had a couple classic includes, including a Fire Prism, 2 support weapon D-cannon platforms, a unit of 6 Shadow Specters, a unit of 5 Warp Spiders, and then following it up with 2 units of 10 Wraithguard and a Wraith Knight. What this list lacks in flexibility, it makes up for in simplicity, with really focusing very heavily on the big Wraith constructs. I really like the Aeldari theme here, putting as much as we can into these crystalline zombie robots. And while I don't think a lot of Aeldari lists are moving in this direction, because Eldar lists tend to be better with a single focal point that they can focus all of their buffs, phantasm, and stratagems on, having 3 big huge units makes it very difficult to interact with. Wraithguard are incredibly hard to shift. Not only do they have high defensive stats, but they also shoot back at you if you shoot them. And they can also use that ability offensively to charge into combat with you, force you to attack them, and then reactively shoot you anyway. Focusing on the Wraith Knight as the focal point of the list to move it around the table means that your opponent has to be so preoccupied dealing with the Wraith Guard and the immense damage that they can represent, they probably don't have enough to actually fell the Wraith Knight. And despite the fact that it doesn't have access to -1 to wound from Fortune in this list, it is still going to be incredibly difficult to shift once those Wraith Guard have done their damage. While most Eldar lists include one of these 3 units, Tom has gone all the way and included all 3, which I think is pretty cool and interesting, and the reason that we're talking about it today. But that's not the only Aeldari list that we are going to talk about today, because we have another interesting one coming from the Kraken GT. This was a 7-round 40-player grand tournament with a top cut to the top 2. The rest of the event played 6 rounds, and the final 2 undefeated players played a 7th. This one was taken down by Sean Sullivan, who played Aeldari, but in a Ynnari variety. This included Ivrain as the army's warlord. So while it didn't have an Autarch to unlock additional command point generation, it did unlock the ability to take 50% of the army as Drukhari. I talk about the mechanic that unlocks this back in my list construction video, so if you want to see exactly how this functions, you can go back over there. But the long story short is that Ynnari lists that have Ivrain as their warlord take some restrictions on the Aeldari units that they can include, but then unlock a bunch of Drukhari include. Well, the Drukhari units don't have the Aeldari faction keyword, and they don't get the Strands of Fate army ability. They do have the Aeldari keyword in their normal keyword line, which means that detachment abilities will actually apply to them, since while the Aeldari Strands of Fate ability requires you to not only be Aeldari, but also have the Strands of Fate ability, the detachment ability applies to every every Aeldari in the army, meaning that the Battle Host Detachment ability is going to apply to all of these Drukhari models, which unironically makes Drukhari probably better in a Ynnari list than they are in their own home faction. This list included a Farseer, a Spirit Seer with Fate's Messenger, a bit of a trend here. I think we're going to see that in a lot of lists. The Incarn, and Yvraine as the Warlord, as I mentioned before. This one also took a unit of Guardian Defenders to put that Farseer into. Not seeing that too often these days, mostly taking the Phoenix Gem to sort of take the place of the Guardian Defender squad, but these guys do generate additional Fate dice, and that is pretty nice. We also had 2 Fire Prisms, a Night Spinner, 2 units of Rangers, 2 units of Warp Spiders, that big 10-man unit of Wraithguard, and then using that Ynnari ability to get a Drukhari Splash to take 3 Ravagers. These guys, for only 95 points, pack 3 massive hard-hitting Dark Lances, which actually makes them significantly more efficient at taking anti-tank weapons than almost all of the Aeldari faction proper. Most units in Aeldari can take 2 Bright Lances for somewhere around 80 points, so for only a 15-point upgrade, you get a 3rd Dark Lance. And while you can't Strands of Fate these things, and they're not the hardest units in the game to kill, their offensive output per point is incredibly good, especially when you have that Battle Host reroll. Now, otherwise this week, Aeldari performed incredibly well, going undefeated at the Palm Springs Open, the Lone Star Open, the Kraken GT, and the Cross Swords GT, as I mentioned before, making up the vast majority of armies that went undefeated this weekend. However, we also saw some Genestealer Cult nipping at their heels. Are you gearing up for Warhammer 40k's 10th edition, but unsure of what war gear you want your units to be equipped with? With a new rule set for the game comes a ton of new challenges, and it's hard to be prepared for everything. You've got new opposing armies to play against, new enemy units to contend with, and a quickly changing metagame. Maybe you're worried about erratas impacting your models or the loadouts you've assembled them with. Well, I have an easy solution for you, and that is magnets. And the easiest way to access that easy solution is the Magnet Baron, your one-stop shop for all of your model modularity needs. Modularity needs. Nailed it. The Magnet Baron is the best place to go to get your armies ready for playing within the new edition. They offer magnetization sets for a wide variety of Warhammer 40k model kits that includes the specific components that you need to magnetize them and allow them to build in any loadout available. So your units can remain flexible without having to break the bank buying additional bits or extra models. Not only that, but the Magnet Baron also includes a wide variety of other useful gaming accessories, including sturdy flight stands that don't snap as soon as you take them out of the box, convenient movement trays for moving large units around, as well as a wide variety of hobby magnets in a frankly ridiculous selection of shapes and sizes. So you can modulate any bit for any model and any part of your collection. So check them out at themagnetbaron.com to get your army ready for the new edition of Warhammer 40k and remain flexible as the game develops. The massive Frontline Gaming Super Major, the Lone Star Open, was a 214-player event that ran over 6 rounds. This one was eventually won by Aeldari, but also had a couple other undefeated players, including Eric Tat, who played Genestealer Cults. Like I said at the beginning of the video, it is looking like players are learning how to play against Genestealer Cults a little bit more, and Genestealer Cult lists are then evolving themselves in order to become more defensive against potential counterplay. Things like Deep Strikers that can come within 3 inches in order to destroy Cult Ambush tokens early are very effective to Genestealer Cults, and without those Cult Ambush tokens, the army is incredibly susceptible to infantry clearing. A single unit of Desolators can kill hundreds of Genestealer Cultists over the course of a game and be extremely difficult for the Genestealer Cults themselves to counteract. So, in Eric's list, we do see a little bit of defensive construction in order to stop that, including an Acolyte Icon Ward who once per game can respawn a Cult Ambush token even after it's destroyed. A Clamavus as well has an Omni Scrambler anti-deep strike aura with outside 12 inches, meaning that enemy reinforcements can't come near him even if they have abilities that would normally allow them to deep strike closer than normal. This means that you can create a safe zone on the table with your Clamavus protecting a table corner or a defended area where you can place your Cult Ambush tokens and be sure that they will be respawned. Even if your opponent overextends to get one, the Acolyte Icon Ward can proc and you you can bring that token back. We also have a Biophagus, a Nexos, and 3 Primuses, as well as a Reductus Saboteur. We have Meticulous Planner on the Nexos, but interestingly, we don't have Inscrutable Cunning on the Biophagus, which is pretty interesting because the list also includes a big unit of Aberrants. Looks like we're going to be using those Aberrants as a bit of a counterpunch instead of an aggressive piece, since oftentimes you'll be using the Biophagus to forward deploy them, but this list does not include that enhancement. The rest of the list is pretty standard Genestealer cults fare, including 1 unit of 10 Acolyte hybrids, 5 units of 20 Neophyte hybrids, 10 model Aberrant squad that I mentioned before, an incredibly resilient and hard-hitting melee piece, alongside 3 Achilles Ridge Runners to bring up the rear. These things are able to support the rest of the army with their Survey Augurs, giving +1 AP and ignore cover to units targeting enemies that they shoot at with any of their weapons, including their mortar. This means that the Ridge Runners can stay very far away from the battle at the edge of the board, screen out enemy deep strikers or anyone trying to muck with their cult ambush tokens, and continuously generate value by killing light infantry units or buffing their guns against harder targets. This means that a lot of the Neophyte hybrids can actually start on the table, and they don't necessarily need to cult, ambush, or deep strike onto the table to get the benefits of the Ascension Day detachment abilities in order to ignore cover to more reliably kill harder targets. They can punch through saves just fine with the buff from the Achilles Ridge Runners alone. Genestealer cults still had an incredible showing, going undefeated not only at Lone Star Open, but also at the Battle for Middle Wisco, a great name for an event. However, put an asterisk there, they didn't actually submit their list, so I don't know what was in it, so I can't talk about that one. Now, I will note as well that another list went undefeated at Lone Star Open besides the ones that we talked about in this video. That was a Tau Empire list, which is pretty exciting to see them go 6-0. However, there's a lot of controversy surrounding the list and a lot of calls of cheating from the community and the players who played against this player. We'll talk about that in a video later this week. And with that, let's jump into the greatest faction in Warhammer 40k, and in fact in any miniatures game ever made, Tyranids, who took down a major this week. The Palm Springs Open was a 6-round, 111-player major that was won by none other than Tyranids. It also had Aeldari as the other undefeated faction and the runner-up, but Tyranids took the top spot. And this is an incredible showing by Joel Wilson. Joel took an absolutely wild Tyranid horde to the event, eschewing a lot of the powerful options that we've discussed in Tyranid lists in the past. And while we've seen Tyranids take smaller events, this is the first time that they've been able to go undefeated at an event this large. So we might be onto something here with this very different composition. This list included a Death Leaper, a Hive Tyrant with no enhancements, and a Nero Tyrant as the Warlord in order to apply his buff to Shadow in the Warp. The list also included basically every single Gant available to the entire universe. This included 20 Hormigons and 100 Termagant. You heard that right. 5 units of 20 of these guys. We also had 2 Biovores to act as free secondary mission scoring. These guys can drop Spore Mines within 48 inches of themselves to make easy scoring for tactical secondaries. Things like engage in all fronts, behind enemy lines, even area denial are easy if you have a Biovore and just place a free Spore Mine wherever you need to go in order to complete those secondaries. That Spore Mine can even do action. So if you have something like Cleanse, you can cleanse the objective in a bioreactive acid. We also have a Lictor, 2 Maleceptors, 22 Neurogaunts, 2 units of 3 Venomthropes, and a small unit of 3 Zoanthropes. Now this list is so interesting because it utterly lacks in hitting power. While the Maleceptors are pretty good at shooting, and the Zoanthropes are solid, and the characters are not too bad as well, the rest of the list is basically just strength 3 Termagants. So you're hoping your opponent doesn't have the infantry sweeping to actually clear all these guys. Even if they do, you are getting cover and stealth from the 2 units of Venomthropes, so you're -1 to hit. You can put those Termagants to a 4+ save. You get a 6+ invulnerable save thanks to the nearby Zoanthropes, and because of the Hive Tyrant, you can put 2 of those units into a 5+ Feel No Pain with rapid regeneration. So while the Termagants don't hit as hard as other horde armies like Genestealer cults, they actually are significantly tougher to kill. And while they don't respawn, that means that a lot of lighter anti-infantry shooting that's maybe strength 4, AP 1 is actually largely going to bounce off these Termagant units. That means that they can really use the Biovore's ability to score secondary objectives essentially for free and stop your opponent from being able to compete with them on primary missions, since you're going to constantly be throwing endless amounts of termagants, using Endless Swarm to regenerate them back into the unit, and keeping them alive with those free rapid regenerations from the Hive Tyrant, which is made much easier since the Neuro Tyrant can place 2 units into Synapse within 12 inches of itself, and you have a huge Synapse aura if it joins into or is nearby the Neurogant unit. If your opponent's unable to kill all of these models very quickly, they're gonna basically have no chance in beating you on primary mission. You're gonna be able to score a bunch of points very quickly, and while your army will most likely be dead by the end of the game, and probably not have killed too much of your opponent's army, that's a small price to pay for the fact that they can't come back with you on score. That said as well, the Tyranid detachment abilities do actually make Termagants and Hormagants not dangerous, but I would say not entirely worthless at shooting either. A Termagant unit pumping 20 strength 5 shots with either lethal hits or sustained hits, depending on what adaptation is available to them and what they're shooting at, is not too bad. And Hormagants attacking up to 60 times with the same effect is actually not too bad. On top of that, the Maleceptors and the Zoanthropes and even the Hive Tyrant can late game pretty well, so if you're able to push through your opponent's infantry, you can actually beat out their backline stuff pretty effectively. Overall, super interesting list. Very cool to see Horde Mode Tyranids back on the table, and congratulations to Joel for taking this one down. So a big, major win in the belt of the Tyranids this week. As always, thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. If you like this style of list breakdown, I do them on my Tuesday stream show, so please go check me out over there. Thanks to everybody who supports the channel either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are great and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.